I know they do. Go ahead, Chuck. I know it. I don't like it. Yeah, okay.
Is Shirley Cotton? Dorothy Dunnefeller? Leonard Shaw? Mary, Nellie Smith? Mary Woodruff. Can you still hear me, everybody? It's not like I would like to welcome all of you, and I'm so happy to see all of you come to this. And it's been a very exciting thing for me because I have gotten to talk to all these wonderful people lots of times on the telephone. And they are so exciting about everything. But I was going to do a little talking while we were to start in about the one-room schoolhouse. This was a surprise to me when I started looking this all up and thinking about the wonderful teachers I had at these one-room schoolhouses. It was just unreal how wonderful they were. My first year was at Onion Valley, and by the way, my mother also went to Onion Valley, but not the same year. I had two sisters. We went to school together, and we rode a horse to school about 3 miles. And Mary Helen would sit in the saddle. I would get behind her, and then Henry would sit behind to keep me from falling off. And it worked. I don't think I ever fell off. I dropped my Easter eggs one time, and that was kind of tragic, real tragic. Dale Porter lived about halfway between the school and our house. So he had a horse he rode. Of course, our horses liked to race and didn't bother us too much either, you know. But anyhow, it was really quite an experience because our horse was named Baldy. And his horse was named Coley, but he was a white horse. He'd been black when he was born. My first teacher was Ruby Busby. And she was such a fantastic lady. Of course, I was in the first grade, but I must have learned because she passed me on. Anyway, but she was a very pretty lady, and she also always wore heels and hose to a one-room schoolhouse, you know. And that was something that really kind of came to my attention and everything. And her husband's name was Leonard Busby, and I found out just a few days ago that our own Leonard Shaw was named after him. Leonard's mother maiden name was Busby. So that was kind of interesting to me. And then, and Earl Busby, if any of you know him, Leonard was his uncle also. Then in my second grade, I was blessed again with a wonderful person. My teacher was Mary Childers. And I don't have to say too much about that lady. She was fantastic. She was good at everything. Her personality, I never saw her get angry. I never saw her ever get out of sorts or anything with anyone. And one of the things I remember the most about her is because in the fall, when it was cloudy and wind blowing and everything, why she would stand there and hold the bit of our horse and help us all three get on. And when we got on, she'd say, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" And when we said yes, she'd turn loose, and that horse, boom, out of that, he was headed for home. He had stood there all that time, and he was ready to go. And Christmas vacation in my second grade with Mary Childers, we moved to Clear Fork. And when we moved to Clear Fork, we did it all on Christmas vacation, and it was quite a thing. I can remember us having boxes with our dolls in them and writing Fragile on the outside. And we were the movers, you know. We were the people that were doing the moving. So when Henry and Mary Helen and I went to school, our first day that we went to school at Clear Fork, there were only 4 other people in the school. So here we were, half the school practically. And again, another wonderful thing, Mildred Beale was my teacher. So here I go, another wonderful teacher. She was very good. She did a lot of things with us. She never stopped teaching. She ate lunch with us. She played kick the can. She played hide and seek, anything, you know, with us. She even walked home from school with us. And she was the janitor and the maintenance person, one that fed the stove, the one that brought in the water bucket from the cistern. She did all of those things. But during World War II is when this was. And she taught us how to make lap ropes to send to the soldiers somewhere. And then we did a victory garden, which that was pretty fantastic. That was fun. And then in my 5th grade, I started my 5th grade. Well, guess who was my teacher then? Opal Seahorn Lynch. I mean, another fantastic person. I had a very good education. I really did. But anyway, she was the same thing as Mrs. Beale. She did all of the work. She did all of these things. She just was fantastic, the things she did. And I look back on all of this and think, how could they do so much? Still have a family, you know, and all of that. But Mrs. Seahorn, that's what I called her at that time, she would have us come in a half an hour, each of us come in a half an hour before school, and she gave us piano lessons for free. So it was really a neat thing. It was a good start for me. But I was always the one that thought I was better than I really was. I took the sheet music for Red Wing to school the first time and said, I'll play this for you. And she says, well, you will sometime, but not today. I had her for school, my school teacher for 4 years. And I learned really well, because she was a little strict, that if the expression changed on her face, somebody was in trouble. It's not going to be I. Never. But I was really happy with the teachers I had. Then I graduated from Crawford School, went to Western State College, went to Missouri with my husband for Army. And then when I came back, I was lucky because they started asking me if I would substitute at Crawford. And it worked out really well for me because I learned a lot, and it was a good thing. The only person I think it bothered was my oldest daughter, and she sat in the back of the room with a book in front of her face saying, Dear Lord, don't let anyone know that's my mother. But anyhow, I got to substitute a lot for different teachers, but the funny thing about it is I got to substitute for Mrs. Beale and Mrs. Reed a lot because they were getting ready to retire. And at that time, if you didn't use up your sick leave days, you didn't get paid for them. You just lost them. And they taught me so much. They taught me all the time, and it helped me so much in my later days. But I was lucky enough to become the kindergarten teacher in Crawford for 14 years, and that was the best job I've ever had. I've had lots of jobs. That was the best job I ever had. Those little ones were so wonderful, and they were so eager to learn. I made lots of friends. It was wonderful. Thank you. And now I'll give this to Barbara.
The natural beauty of Crawford country and the several the natural beauty of Crawford country and the several friendships of folks who call that area home are treasures for me. Early Crawford friends were made through county 4-H activities and later during high school years. Some of you will remember those great Saturday night dances at the Crawford Gym. You will remember dancing the night away to Faubert's irresistible rhythm, and just maybe catching the times when Red and Ronnie Christian joined the band to play the same banjo at the same time. That father and son would switch fingering and strumming without missing a beat. So, in the fall of 1957, I felt lucky to be hired to teach English at Crawford High School, and I was. My classes were 8th grade through seniors. The senior class was unique. It consisted of 7 boys. The good-sized junior class combined with the senior boys to emphasize literature for the semester. Soon after school began, it became apparent that there was some real brilliance showing up on a paper or two. That presented a challenge for me. Thank goodness for the helpful suggestions offered by my near and dear mother. My other students studied the usual English subjects. At that time, Emily McKendrick Lynch was the wonderful school secretary, and Mrs. Zeldentice's hot lunches were simply outstanding. One morning, the noted Congressman Wayne Aspinall visited our school and spoke to the student body. In general, the students were capable and cooperated well with each other. They would plan class parties and get together to make cookies. The girls made their own vests for pep club uniforms. Just over a year later, they even organized a dearly appreciated shower for our new baby. Most of the kids at Crawford were familiar with hard work and were generous and kind. I learned a lot from them. I didn't teach again in the North Fork Valley until 1967 and was very happy to have a job teaching at Hotchkiss Elementary. After all, elementary education was my college major. Hotchkiss had 2 classes of each grade level. My 4th grade room consisted of 19 students. It was by far the smallest class of 4th graders I ever taught. And it's true, smaller classrooms do make a big difference. For me, the year was a smooth one and a real joy. The students worked so hard and were a considerate group of youngsters and such fun. Good winter snow days would find all of us sledding down the hill on anything slick to the football field. The faculty was congenial and on the ball. One day, while the kids were out of school for recess, the principal, Harold Wick, stepped into my room and told me of the shooting death of Martin Luther King Jr. Quietness settled over the whole school that day. Dot Clay covered music for the building at that time. Hi, Dot. In the spring, it was a true treat for our room when Dorothy Garber agreed to teach us art on Friday afternoons for a whole month. For Mother's Day, the kids took home pretty watercolor paintings of flowers. That year of teaching was a pleasure, and I thought the world of some of those 4th graders. I still do. No doubt all of you know that the large stone building just south of the Hotchkiss City Hall, it's City Hall, not Town Hall, who said that a while ago, used to be the old Hotchkiss Grade School, and it was for many, many years. And I think I'm the only one on the panel who attended that school as a kid, so I thought I'd mention a few things about those years. In 1940, on my first day of school in Colorado, I was welcomed to second grade by Miss Dorothy McCummins, this Dorothy's dear aunt. Our playground was sandy dirt and plain old rocky. The girls had to wear dresses. As a result, we also usually wore skinned knees. That meant a trip upstairs to Miss Seller's room to be painted with the dreaded methylate. In the winter, wearing dresses necessitated long cotton stockings, itchy wool snow pants, and rubber galoshes with buckles. Our recess minutes were nearly consumed by putting on and taking off our outerwear. Kids enjoyed building snow forts and having snowball fights. No water soakers. You know that, no water soakers. You believe that, don't you? And sledding down the hill from the railroad tracks to the alley. The south side of the building was where the playground equipment was mostly located. Swings, a merry-go-round, a slide, and splintery teeter-totters. Those teeter-totter rides often resulted in more trips to Miss Seller's room, these times for the methylate and tweezer treatment. I just talked to a kid a day ago, about 30 years younger than I. He said, 20, yes, he says, I got a splinter in those very same teeter-totters, I think. Oh dear. The playground games must have been the same everywhere. Marbles, kick the can, Red Rover, run sheep run, a lot of softball, flying Dutchman, and jumping rope. I recall the boys playing mumbly peg. They would flip their open pocket knives into a circle scratched into the dirt. That wouldn't go over today. The hot lunches were iffy and not too spiffy. World War II was on. Several things were rationed. Some months hot lunches were served, others they weren't. And I think families could bring fresh produce and home-canned items to help pay for hot lunches. Most of the kids brought their lunches from home. I remember 4 of our substitute teachers, Nellie Tanner, Gladys Holmes, Betty Jo's mom, if you remember her, Marita Grotenhuis, and Mark Clay. Polio was a real threat. One autumn, the beginning of school was delayed for at least a week. We had to make up those missing days on Saturdays. My 3rd grade year was interesting. It was the only year I can remember having a regular music class. Maybe that was because our teacher, Miss Brooks, played the violin. It's fun to remember my friend and classmate, Margaret Winter, playing the piano for some of the songs we sang. She played by ear, and her feet could barely reach the pedals. Another thing interesting about 3rd grade was that we had more than one teacher for a few months. Before he joined the Navy, Burns Drake taught us arithmetic, and Mary Ellen Sullivan was our English teacher. Mary Ellen happened to be my adored cousin, and soon after that year, she married Art Olson, who was manager of the creamery. Now, of course, school days aren't always a bed of roses for either teachers or students. But those days usually give us lifelong friendships and a treasure chest full of memories.
Well, I think this is a good time for something that I forgot. I have never forgotten. What did I do yesterday? Pastor Coots, would you lead us in school days?
Oh, good.
And this is quite a large choir that we have here today. And so my music teachers would always say we need to stand for good breathing. So this is a good time, and teachers always like to have interactive groups going on. So if you'd all stand, and on the back of your programs, you will find the words School Days. And I did a little research on the computer to find out that this song was written in 1907, and the most familiar part that is sung is the chorus. There are actually 2 verses that go along with this song, but this is the chorus to the song School Days. And I also have a cassette player that I will be playing the music on, which is now considered an antique. So we'll jump right in with School Days.
Our next speaker will be Shirley Cobb.
Tough acts to follow, huh? I started teaching in 1956 at the old Lincoln School in Delta. It was a 2-story building. My room was on the 2nd floor at the end of the hall on the south side of the building. It got lots of sunshine and was bright and cheerful. Mrs. Doris Dixon was the principal. She was very helpful and kind to this first-year teacher. I had lots of support from my fellow teachers. However, once I was not too popular. When I went home in the evening, I had forgotten and left one of my windows open a crack. When I unlocked my door the next morning, there was a strange smell in my room. During the night, a bunch of migrating bats had decided to spend the night in my room. There was a glass air deflector in front of the window, and the bats were between the window and the glass. Before the kids got there, the janitor came with gloves and a box and collected the bats. We didn't know that some of the bats were asleep in the Venetian blinds. No sooner had the students and I started the day than the bats began to wake up and start flying around the room. It scared the kids, and they jumped up and started screaming and ran out the door and down the hall in both directions. I went after them and closed the door to keep the bats in the room. As I stepped into the hall, the other teachers were glaring at me from their doorways and would immediately slam the door. Wow, was I unpopular until they found out what was taking place. I was not originally hired to teach in Delta. When I put in my application and went for an interview, Mr. Kreitz told me he had only one opening. It was at the Ragged Mountain School. I had never been to Ragged Mountain School, and I must have been thinking,
I can't miss this opportunity to teach. So I immediately said, I'll take it. Dumb? Probably. He went on to explain that there was a place to live at the school. I would probably have 12 students in grades 1 through 8. I would also have to be the janitor and the bus driver. They would provide a Jeep station wagon for me to pick up the kids. I was married, but I would be living there alone since Orville was in the Army and had been sent to Germany for 18 months. I wasn't going to be stopped by a few minor details, so I said, okay. Mr. Kite said, well, maybe you better go look at the school. I didn't have a car, so I asked my dad and brother to take me to Ragged Mountain. We drove and drove and drove on this narrow dirt road. This was before the Pioneer Reservoir and the paved road. My dad was getting more nervous all the time, just thinking about me spending the winter up there, and he was not liking it. It was a beautiful day, and I didn't think it could be all bad. If I were hired to teach at Ragged Mountain, how did I end up in Delta? I think it was fate, or maybe luck. During the summer, a third grade came open in Delta, and a man teacher from Oklahoma applied for the job, and he was sent to Ragged Mountain, and I went to Delta. I didn't quite finish my first year at Delta Elementary because Clinton was born in April. My contract was renewed for the next year if I would get 12 quarter hours of summer school. This was required by the Colorado Department of Education to renew my temporary certificate. I had an Associate of Arts degree in elementary education from Mesa Junior College, and I might say my government teacher is here at his fate today. So I could get a one-year certificate. I gave Martha Savage $1, and she took care of the paperwork. For the next year, I would get $240 a month instead of $210 that I got the year before. When summer school started in June, I was there with Clinton, who was 6 weeks old, and a sister to babysit. At the end of the summer, I returned to Delta to teach another year. By the end of that year, Orville was home from Germany and had a job on a ranch 15 miles north of Gunnison. So we moved when school was out. We spent the next 6 years there. I attended Western State College every summer and had just graduated when Orville was offered a job on a ranch on Kodiak Island in Alaska. I applied for a job there and was notified that I had been hired for a third grade position. The problem was getting there. I had less than 2 weeks. We left Grand Junction, Orville, our 3 sons, 3, 4, and 6, for Kodiak. It was 105 degrees in Grand Junction. We had to leave our car in storage because it could only be taken to Kodiak by barge. We didn't even know how to go about that. We went to Kodiak by train, bus, and plane. The plane took us to the Navy base on Kodiak. We flew in over the ocean and headed straight for Pillar Mountain. It looked to me like it was the end, but we had a good pilot. It was raining and cold. Our warm leather coats and boots were coming from Gunnison with the cattle, but that's another story. The bus took us to the Kodiak Hotel, the one and only. It had a gigantic bear statue in front and a no vacancy sign. They took pity on us and told us the rooms were reserved for hunters, but they wouldn't be in until the weekend. The ranch where Orville was to work was 30 miles from town. We had no car. I called the superintendent and he told me he'd see me on Monday. The school was a one-story building in an L shape. All 12 grades, or I should say 13, were in the same building because the kindergarten was there too. The superintendent's office was also there in that building. He expected his teachers to dress well. The guys wore ties and suit coats. The women dresses, hose, and appropriate shoes. The guys, we did not leave the teacher's lounge with a cup of coffee in our hand. That was not professional. The guys did not stand around with their hands in their pockets or sit on their desks. Mr. Schott was over what they called the Island Borough Schools, and they were run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He was originally from Kansas, and my principal, Mrs. Springhill, was from Broomfield. He was well liked and respected by parents and teachers. The Navy base had their own school, but there was another school they called the Old School downtown. It had grades 1 through 4. Clinton went to 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade there. The students I taught were mostly white. Their fathers were in the Air Force, Navy, or Coast Guard. Some of them owned the canneries or the fishing boats. They fished for salmon, halibut, and crabs. Kodiak is the king crab capital of the world. The natives, called Aleuts, worked on boats or in canneries. I had one little Eskimo girl. She was a challenge. She was an orphan and lived at the Baptist Mission Home. One day, one of the little girls brought a bottle for show and tell. It had a music box with a ballerina in the bottom. I thought perfume came in pretty bottles. So I told her how nice it was and save it for later because school hadn't taken up yet. I went on checking papers. Pretty soon, one of the other kids came and said, "Mrs. Cotton, Kathy's drinking that." I flew over my desk and grabbed it as I was yelling, "What is that?" My little Eskimo girl just smiled sweetly and said, "Whiskey?" I said, "No, it isn't." But when I stuck it under my nose, I knew she was right. I locked it in my desk drawer and hoped I wouldn't get fired. We had been in Kodiak 7.5 months when the Alaskan earthquake hit. The total downtown was wiped out by the tidal wave. The boat harbor was destroyed and many of the boats. The people were out of work and the groceries were scarce. We spent the night on Pillar Mountain and didn't know until daylight that our house was still there, and thank God it was. The school became a refugee camp. Those who had lost their homes and those from the native village were fed and cared for there for about 10 days before we could go back to school. They had a chicken pox epidemic while the kids were there and all kinds of flu. Orville could tell you about that. He was the janitor. We went back to school with a huge crab boat in the schoolyard. We were all really jumpy. The aftershocks were scarier than the first one because we knew what could happen. Every time there was an aftershock, we crawled under our desks and waited. A week later, a big aftershock hit. It was more powerful than the first. I had the kids get in the coat closet because the lights were whipping back and forth. The superintendent finally came up the hall, and by then we were sitting in our desks. He said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, we're fine," even though my knees were knocking, my heart was throbbing, and I was trying to look calm. He said the teacher across the hall had started for the door and her kids ended up on the playground. At the end of school, we caught a plane and came home for the summer. When we went back, we could take our car up the Alcan and put it on the ferry. When school opened, we were short 65 students. Some people had been evacuated by the Navy. Others didn't have jobs, and some had just had enough. We stayed 3 more years. By then, Orville had had enough of rain, so we sold everything we couldn't get in our station wagon and headed back down the Alcan. I got a job teaching 4th grade at Eckerd for 2 weeks. I only had 17 students, and they needed a teacher for accommodation class in Cedar Edge, about 34 students. So I finished that year and 3 more in Cedar Edge. After the first year, we moved to Gould Reservoir. Opal Lynch taught the other 2nd grade, so we carpooled for 3 years. She retired, and I transferred to Paonia. I taught 2nd grade there for 25 years. I did teach a few 1st and 2nd combinations. We were in the old building in Paonia. I was in 3 different rooms in that building. When the Rulisson blast shook the building, most people didn't even feel it, but I was still quite shy. I just about bowled it. The 4th and 2nd grades were later housed in a modular. Willa Sorensen was the principal. When they brought the modular in, the first one was being unloaded when Willa noticed the back was facing the playground. She ran out telling them to stop. They need to turn it around to face the playground. They said they were told to put it that way, and that was the way it was going to stay, and it did. Margaret Pierce and I were in the back modular facing toward the 4th grade. There was a space between, a perfect place for kids to hide. We had volunteers from the community. Skip the line. I had a phone in my room so we could call the office in case of an emergency. Thank goodness there weren't any real big emergencies. We started a Friday afternoon club because we were accused of not letting the kids have any fun. We had volunteers from the community come in and teach the kids fun things. And there were a lot of interesting things going on. One of the kindergarten girls started calling me Mrs. Puff. Boy, did that name stick. One time, one of the volunteers brought 4 kid goats to my room. She had bottles with nipples on, filled with water. Things got a little wild, and you have heard what goes in must come out. That's true. After they were gone, I started cleaning up the puddles. Willa called to see if I'd forgotten the teacher's meeting. I said, I'll be over when I get the water cleaned up and my resignation written. I thought I had had enough fun. Of course, I didn't resign. Monday was a new day, and everything was okay. I stayed long enough to see a new school building built. It was great to be out of the modulars. I stayed in Paonia for 25 years before I retired. I had taught 2 years in Delta, 4 years in Kodiak, 4 years in Cedar Ridge, and 25 years in Paonia, plus student teaching in Grand Junction and Gunnison, and substituting in Crawford.
I'm a little tired just listening to that. My next speaker will be Dorothy Dunfield.
Well, mine isn't nearly as exciting as Shirley's, that's for sure. I did my student teaching in Hotchkiss in 1967 under Emily McAllister that fall. And then I got my degree from Western State and was hired to teach in Hotchkiss in February. One of the teachers was pregnant, and I got to take her place. And that was the year that Barbara was in the 4th grade there. And it's because of Barbara that I remained in Hotchkiss. At the end of that year, they told me that I would have to go to Delta. Well, I had Jenny and Dana at Mayer, and I didn't see how I was going to get them to school and drive to Delta every day, and I was feeling pretty sorry for myself, I think. Anyway, bless Barbara's heart, she decided she would go to Delta. So for that reason, I got to go. And I had a great time there. It was just most enjoyable. I see one of my very favorite students right there. Oh, I enjoyed it. I had such a good time. Nothing out of the ordinary there. About the 3rd year I was there, I think, we had an enormous change. And I had 43 4th graders. You remember that, Barb? I think Hal was in that class. Reba Kahn was hired to be my aide. And so we got along fine, divided the reading class. So I had 2 separate classes of reading. And it worked out very well. I think it was probably that year that I got the scare of my life. Steve West, little 4th grader out playing, fell and hit his head on the sprinkler. And kids brought him in crying. I looked at him, and almost immediately there was a red crack came right down his forehead. It was the most scary thing I could imagine. Don Tate was there, and he grabbed him up and took him to the clinic. And actually his skull had cracked, but you could see it. Oh, it just was petrifying. But I can't remember what time of year that was, probably in the spring, because I don't think he came back to school that year. I would go out. They lived up there on Mesa above Bell Creek in the evenings and take work to him. And I know he wore a helmet all the time. But that was probably the most traumatic part of my teaching. I didn't imagine. I taught in Hotchkiss for 13 years, and then I went to Delta, and I taught there for 7 years. And it was quite a big difference between teaching in Hotchkiss and in Delta. I don't recall there ever being discipline problems in Hotchkiss. I just don't. You had so much support. The kids were so responsible. And I think in Delta, where there were a lot more students, and a lot of them lived in town, and they didn't have the things to do at home, like 4-H and feeding the calves and this sort of thing that the rural kids did. But I did enjoy it, and I taught there for 7 years, so I retired after only teaching for 20 years, 37. I have more stories, I think, to talk about my experience in a one-room school. And Margaret said a great many of the things that I had thought about. When I was in the 1st grade, Ermine Stafford was the teacher. And she drove up from Crawford. Well, the roads weren't even graveled at that time. And just imagine struggling to school. She'd call my dad, and he'd have to take a team and go down and pull her out or something like that, you know. When she got to school, she had to build a fire in the big old pot-bellied stove. While the room was warming up, she played the piano beautifully, so we played musical chair. And that kept us warm for a while. Then, the first thing we did after we saluted the flag and always sang America or Star Spangled Banner, we sang for 15 minutes. And it was a choice what song we were going to sing. And naturally, it was out of the Golden Book of Songs. And I looked at that last night, and I thought, that has to be the best songbook that's ever written. There's about 200 songs in this little thing. All the nursery rhymes, all the Christmas music you can imagine, all of Stephen Foster, all of these beautiful songs. And so funny, I can remember Christine Wynett. She always chose Robin Robin Redbreast. My brother George always chose Old Dog Tray. Every time. So last night when I was playing these and just going through it, I was surprised. I'd come to the Santa Lucia. I could sing every word of it. I could sing Juanita. All of these songs are so old. And one of the Scotland. Wearing the green. But anyway, I brought this and I'm going to donate it to the museum. I don't imagine they have a copy. And it's a marvelous book. The things that about the country school, it was more like just one big family. If you were out playing baseball, everybody had to play because you didn't have enough if you didn't. First graders through eighth graders, you know. And it was kind of good. You play workup, you know, you could kind of go that way. If you had to draw teams, I hated it because I was so bad. I was always the last one drawn for the baseball team. But we also had music lessons not each other's every day, but every week. The whole class had a music lesson. So by the time that school was out that year, every kid in school played the piano and played quite well. We had an operetta, and I have some pictures here. I'll leave them out. You can look later. But all the costumes were made just beautifully. I was a butterfly. George was a frog. Ned Allen was a dandelion. So I'm going to leave these back here so you can look at them. We, almost every Friday evening, we'd have a coasting party in the winter. And Butch Wynett was the guy that graded the roads. But I always try to run out there and catch him on Friday. Please don't grade the roads because we want the coast, you know. This story that I told Margaret, and I think she wanted me to talk about it a little bit. We had a deer, and he always would come to the coasting parties. And when I was cooking for hunters the last few years, I'd always get to tell this story, and Justin, the guy that hired me, said, "Oh, one of Dorothy's deer stories again." But you know how you take the sled and you go running, you take a belly flopper, and you go down on your stomach? Here come Big Boy like this, and then you jump on your back. And you try to ride down, you know. And Justin never did believe that story. So I was so pleased last summer when Hazel McLeod was home. She was over one day and we were visiting. She said, "Dorothy, do you remember how Big Boy would jump on our backs when we were so And I guess because of the fact that, you know, he loved the kids and everything, he came to school 2 or 3 times. And he'd scratch on the door, and the teacher'd let him in, and then he'd either go to George or to me, and then just stick around until we went home, you know. But those were the things that I remember, and I thought the teachers had to be so extremely good to teach, you know, 1 through 8, and supervise the playgrounds and build the fire and this sort of thing. I think as a teacher I had it pretty easy. Thank you.
Next, I would like to call on Leonard Shaw.
Do you have security here? I see 6 or 8 students out here, and I'm not sure that they were frisked for tomatoes and stuff. Because they warned me that they were going to get me. It's all right. I got in my blows before. I started teaching at Hotchkiss High School in 1961. I retired from Hotchkiss High School in 1994. I spent 33 years in Hotchkiss, and not really sure why I got interested in education, other than the fact, I guess, I was close to it because my folks drove school bus in Crawford for 32 years. So I guess that was my beginning. Of course, Martha Savage, I knew Martha really well. Her dad, as a matter of fact, had helped get me a scholarship to Adams State College. So that's where I got my beginnings. I was hired to teach freshman English, sophomore English, and world history. I taught with a number of teachers that I had had myself when I was in school. I didn't have the fortune being with Dorothy. She came in after I had, but Dorothy Carr, I think who a lot of you remember, as the music teacher in the elementary building, was my high school music teacher. And Margaret had asked me if I would lead school days because I used to do a little singing on the side, but due to old age and some health reasons, I don't do that much anymore. But Dorothy is the one that got me started singing. But I came to Hotchkiss 61 teaching English and social studies. Over the course of the 33 years, I could take the next 10 minutes, and it would take the whole 10 minutes to tell you all the things that I ended up having to teach in the time that I taught. I taught all the way from 5th grade English to freshman college English. I finished up in my later years. I would teach a 5th grade social studies class at the elementary, make a mad dash to the high school, and teach a freshman college English class. To change from a 5th grade level to a freshman college level was quite a challenge, I guarantee. Not only did I teach the many different classes, but I also spent quite a bit of time with extracurricular activities. I put on junior and senior class plays. I coached baseball. I coached basketball at all levels for 25 years, from junior high through varsity. And had some success and lots of failure. But in a small school, that's kind of the way it goes sometimes. You get good cycles, and then you have not so good cycles. But I enjoy teaching for most part. Although I wasn't like some of these ladies. When I retired, I said, don't call me. And I wasn't. Times have changed. Kids have changed. Home lives have changed. And things were a lot different from when I started and when they finished. Lots of good things happened, and some that weren't so good. We see lots of kids that we had during this time who have been very successful in things that they went on to do, and I think that was, to me, was the one goal, that they would be successful in their lives. And you try to impart that. The education, to me, is more than just book learning. That it was also life learning. And hopefully that was a part of what we did. We had to teach some classes, marriage and the family. I got stuck with that. I guess you would say that I was the substitute teacher at school. Whenever they needed something, guess who they hollered at? I taught typing one year, believe it or not. And I had had typing when I was a freshman in high school. That was the last time. And I ended up teaching a year of typing at HCHS High School. I taught general math, and I hated math with a passion for 1 year. Most of my time was spent in the old building out here before they built a new one. I was in room 20 until Mr. Woodruff came, and they threw me out of room 20, and he took it over. So they moved me to room 23. And it was interesting. That was the second story. And there was some years there that we had some rather interesting, the typing room was right directly above me, and there were some interesting things happen. More than once, I saw students come by my window as they had figured out a way to get out the window, get away from the teachers, and they went by my window, and I had to watch and see what they were doing. You know, kids, they were creative back then too, just like they are now. And like I say, we had a teacher or two in that level that sometimes you wondered where they were. Maybe they were encouraging to get out the windows. I thought about it a time or two, maybe encouraging some to get out the window, but I didn't. We enjoyed the years. We had good parental support here, and to me, that's the key. If you want to see successful schools, you've got to have successful homes. And I think that was important. And because of that, teaching was fun. I don't have a lot of good stories. Like I say, I spent 33 years here, just doing what I hope was the best job that I could do. And hopefully the kids, most of them at least, were successful in life.
Our next speaker will be Nellie Smith. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I see so many faces I know, and that's always reassuring. I graduated from Western State in 1943, and in order to get a life certificate, we had to take a lot of courses in methods of teaching. And in some of these courses, we learned quite a few things. One of them was to the teacher, always stand up when the principal comes in your room. And another one, be careful what you ask a student to do, because you have to be sure that student does it. And there were other many good suggestions, I'm sure. They told us never to discuss personal issues in a classroom. So I always figured that my age was a rather personal issue. And when some of those students asked me how old I was, I deflected. We started talking about it. One day, not too long ago, though, in a classroom, a student asked me how old I was, and I kept my positive approach, and I said, well, you know, I was born during the Civil War. And nobody smiled. Nor did I. This was not a history class filled with but I could see them whispering, and it was the quietest classroom I've ever we had, in that 60 years ago and more, because I have been in a classroom a total of probably 50 years, no computers to start with, of course. We had blackboards and chalk. Well, just the other day I was talking with my daughter, who teaches in Houston, and she said, you don't use chalkboards anymore in chalk, you use smartboards. Well, some of you probably know what the smartboards are. I didn't. Anyway, it's a contraption or something that you wheel around in the classroom, and you just poke a finger here, poke a finger there, and you get the information you want on it and show it to the class. That's easier than writing on the chalk on the board. Anyway, we live in a different day and age. In order to, when we were using chalkboards, I used a lot of writing on the board for questions that they answered sometime in essay questions, and this was an amazing thing. Some of the students wrote pages and pages in answer to the questions. They used it as a type of essay. Amazing, really. We also typed off many rap sheets where we could run off tests and grade them that way. I remember packing around tests for a week at a time. I never got time to read all of them. They wrote so many answers to the essay questions. But that was when I was teaching history classes. My major was in Spanish. Now, in teaching Spanish, you have to use a different approach, naturally. And I always use, at the beginning of the class, words that they should have been familiar with because they were so similar to the English. For instance, if I say to you adios or radio for radio, rancho, and that type of word, mañana, Montana, you probably understand it, but we didn't dwell on the words very long. We went to using sentences, and there too, we could use sentences that were easily understood. La banana es una fruta. El elefante es un animal. Colorado es un estado. And there are many, many more sentences that we can use. I had a good, excellent textbook. And the conversation was practiced between two students. Frequent history selections about Mexico and Central America, but they were written in Spanish after a while when they had some kind of Spanish. And then we could answer questions about it in Spanish. Songs were always good. Of course, my singing ability was a little bit on the shy side. I had to rely on something else. As far as activities in school, there were many, of course, such as class trips, junior, senior prom, girls' club, that type of thing.
in the early days of high school. And good, just, oh, it was wonderful to have those kind of students in those classes. One prom I remember, in the spring, of course, and they decided on in apple blossom time. It so happened that the apples were in blossom, and the students went out and clipped some of the branches off the trees. I'm hoping their parents didn't mind. One year in particular during the high school years, they didn't have a music teacher for a short time, a very short time. But the principal allowed the people who had instruments played a period in the day for this activity. And he asked me if I would be the sponsor or whatever, and I said yes. But I was not a music teacher, nor did I direct it, nor did I try to. I knew how to read music, fortunately. I played with the dance band at Western State, for one thing, and that was good. But that was for a very short time. Now, there's another activity in which I participated for speech teams. I did not sponsor the speech team myself, but the teachers in the different schools needed judges. It takes a lot of judges to judge a student at a speech meeting because each student appears before a judge 3 times. And I would encourage anybody to participate in this type of activity. It is so rewarding. The students are absolutely wonderful. It actually is a state sponsored, and it covers the entire Western Slope. Small schools engage in this as well as the large schools. I remember taking a test to be certified in judging. I had to take the test in Mike McMillan's office. And I wonder if he remembered that one year I substituted for 6 weeks in Paonia, and he was a senior that year at Paonia High School, and he was in the class. And here I was sitting in his office. So that was payback time. Also, as a high school student, high school teacher, the reunions that they have in Hotchkiss are just wonderful undertakings. You never will forget them as a teacher if you have the opportunity. The class of 48 sponsored the last reunion in '08 for the classes of 47, 48, 49. And they had many class reunions, and they are wonderful. This whole experience of 6 years of full-time teaching, 7 years part-time, 37 substituting, in such a wonderful surroundings, the wonderful place of Hotchkiss has been something outstanding in my life, and for that I am very thankful.
Now our next speaker will be Mary Woodruff.
No, if I need it, I've got this packing off. Decided I better have something with me to keep my foot there.
First, I would like to thank Nellie because she substituted for me many times and pulled me out of the I don't know, bind that I was in. And I do remember one year I had to have some surgery about 3 weeks before school was over, and bless her heart, she came in and finished up for me, and I was just so grateful to have her do this. My husband and I came here in 1963, and I applied for an elementary education job with Rex Rainey, and he looked over my credentials and he said, would you be interested in teaching home economics? And I asked where, and he said at the Hodgson High School. I said I would really much prefer going into elementary because I had really planned on doing this. Well, he sent me to see Bill Charlesworth, and we talked about it, and so I went back to Rex, and I said I will take the position for a year, but then I would like to have a transfer. So he assured me that when a transfer came up, that he would give this to me. Well, I taught in the high school from 1963 until 1988. And I did finally get a transfer, but it was after that. When I took the position, I did not realize it at the time, but in Colorado, they do not have textbooks for home economics. Very few reference books. So when I walked in and started to see what I had to work with, there wasn't much there. So I started trying to figure out what I was going to do. We had 2 kitchens and 8 sewing machines, 5 were electric, and there were 3 threaders. So I decided that 4 to a kitchen, this meant 8 of the students could work at one time in the kitchen. The rest, I had to figure out something else for them to do, which I did. I learned to lecture. I did my own research. I started buying books, and at home, I'd go home and I'd do my homework where I could go in the next day and try to stay one jump ahead of the kids. After we finished a unit, they would have a test, and if we were in foods, they would make lesson plans on food preparation and so forth, and then they would do their preparation, and we would sample it, and then be graded on it. We did eat our mistakes, I might mention, because they simply would be too costly not to, but most of the food was very good, and I don't have too many complaints about it. We started out with nutrition, with the basic 7, and some of the foods that the kids prepared and learned about: breads, vegetables, fruits, meats. We did a lot of wild meats. Some were bear, Rocky Mountain oysters, raccoon, a lot of elk, and venison. And I remember Tim Potter had killed a bear, and he gave me some bear meat. And frankly, I didn't particularly want to cook it at home. So I put it in the freezer, and when one of the kids said, let's have bear meat, I said, great, I've got some. They did an excellent job with it. I was very pleased, and they got an A, as I remember. They also studied and learned to make omelets, pastries, cakes, and the girls did a lot of cake decorating. Every holiday, Christmas, Halloween, whatever, we did cake decorating. They learned to make crepes, pasta. We studied foreign foods. And if the kids had something that was good, they liked to share with their teachers. And I know Leonard and Phil both got samples of food, and especially if the kids were in trouble someplace along the way, they would take the food to the teachers. And the only thing I requested was the teachers did the grading instead of me, because that way somebody else could look at it and see if it looked attractive and if it tasted good and so forth. Besides, I was eating probably 5 or 6 little meals a day. And, you know, that does catch up with you, especially as you get older. We also studied grooming, personal hygiene, manners, social graces, dating relationships, marriage, child care, consumer education, and home decorating. And this was mainly, in starting, I only taught girls. And in 1974, as I remember, I started teaching boys' classes. And I had asked to have boys' classes earlier, but the principal shied away from it. I don't know whether he didn't think I could handle them or what, but on the other hand, he wanted me to have co-ed classes. I didn't think that would work, because when you're studying grooming, boys don't want to learn how to shave their legs, and girls don't want to learn things that boys needed to learn. So I started in with my boys' classes. We did away with hairnets and used ponytails instead. If I could grab a bit of their hair, I gave them a rubber band, boys and girls. And I know the girls were glad to get rid of the hairnets at that time. The aprons did stay. Oh, the boys liked to eat, and so they were very easy to teach as far as foods and such were concerned. I remember only one particular incident in a foods class where the boys were preparing food. And one of the kids, I had a lot of football players and baseball, basketball, the whole works. But I remember looking back, I was working with some other kids in one end of the room, and the others were cooking, and when I looked up, I had one kid who had a rolling pin up like this, and I yelled across the room and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "It's my turn to knead the yeast bread, and he won't let me." So I yelled, "Put the rolling pin down," and I did take care of the situation, but it was sort of funny. I will also mention that the boys were very competitive. Oh, I can remember Larry Tate and Jim Bell, especially on tests. They always want to know who made best grade, what the scores were. I'm going to have a drink of water, if you don't mind. She says that's wonderful. Oh, with the boys, we also did grooming and personal hygiene, manners and dating, how to call a girl for a date, how to behave when you took a girl out, and so forth. And I tried to always have either Mike or Dan Burke come in, they were principals at that particular time, come in and spend at least an hour with the boys, and I'd just leave the room. I don't know what went on, but I felt they were in a better position probably to answer some of the questions than I would. I remember Mike McMillan saying at one time, he said, "Now, when you call a girl and ask her for a date, be sure and tell her who you are," because he said, "When I first called Patty, she said, 'Mike who?' She said, 'I'm Mike McMillan,' and she said, 'Well, who are you?' I'm sure that in a little school she knew who he was. Anyway, I thought that was pleasant. In clothing construction, all the kids learned about the same thing, only they did a lot of different things. The girls made mainly blouses, shirts, skirts, suits, coats, and so forth. In what we call junior high at the time, I mentioned I taught 7th and 8th grade. I would take the girls for one semester or a year. We changed back and forth, and Donnie would take the boys. And so when I had the girls, they all learned how to put in a zipper and a few little basics like this. But as they went on into high school, they already had some background, and so we went from there. The boys did shirts, Levi vests, down coats, gaiters, ski bags, all kinds of ski equipment. In fact, I had one of my students make a down coat. This was a girl, however. It was Janet's daughter made a coat for Mike McMillan. He was very impressed with their work. And So I felt very complimented that my students were even asked to do so. The first couple of years, we had a fashion show in our room to show off what the girls had done. I didn't have the boys do it. As we progressed, the show was moved to the gym. We got judges to judge for a top model, and they would select, as it went on through the years, either a boy or a girl, or sometimes both, as top models. I selected the top seamstress, and when I had boys, the top tailor. And let's see, in 1981 we moved to the new high school, and it was something else. We had 2 refrigerators, we had a food dryer, 4 kitchens, a washer, dryer, and a microwave. We had 12 electric sewing machines. The treadles never moved there. I was told they were too obsolete. So I bought one and took it home, and actually I took the 2 we had left home that summer and stripped them down and refinished them, so to speak. I just stained them, but I did strip them down. I bought one, and Mike McMillan ended up with the other one. And I didn't charge him, but I should have, because of the work I had put into it. I remember the first microwave we had in the old building, and it was back probably in, it had to be before 76 or so, because I had Kathy Taylor, and we had more fun with that. And we popped popcorn in a brown paper bag, and I remember one day she was watching it and she yelled out, she was my assistant then, by the way, and she yelled out, "It's on fire." Sure enough, the bag was on fire. I would like to mention some names. I'm very pleased and proud of my kids, boys and girls, and I do see a lot of my kids out here. Devin and Anita, Susan, I'll look around. I've seen so many of them downtown and off and on. But I had Pauline Carr when I first came, and she went on to school, and she majored in home economics, and she just taught home ec in Crawford and substituted for me, and she even took my place for a while at high school after I left. Beverly Wilson, Cindy Sheldon, and Janine Smith. They were my girls too. I've had many others that did not major in home economics, but I'm sure they're great wives and teachers and such. Sigmund's Meats used to have a cook-off in Denver. We had 3